talking to you anyway. It's great.
Don, thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview, and I know you've gone to some trouble to come up here and make yourself available. Much appreciated. I wonder if you could tell us, just in a very potted version, where you were born and when, and your education, right through to the point when you enlisted in the RAAF.
Right. I was the fourth child of my parents, Stuart Dowie, and my mother's maiden name was Dowie. She was Gertrude Dowie. Both early pioneering stock. Initially, my father and mother decided that because of certain undercurrents that existed in that time, it was better to elope and get married rather than put up with argument and so on. So that the drama started by my father hoisting my mother over the garden gate of my grandparents and walking across the parklands, and they were married at Stowe Church in Adelaide. And I was brought up as a youngster in the what was the name of the church? Stowe Church was I've got the seniors moment. The chocolate. Congregational church in Adelaide. In those days, it was difficult, I suppose, to meet all the rigidities of life in those days that there were, and to elope was just not the done thing. However, the family first settled in Prospect, which was on the northern side of Adelaide, and I was 6 months old when the family moved into a house in Dulwich, where my brother John still lives. My first memories of that period would have been some time after I had arrived, but I can remember the cot was in a bedroom facing west, and the evening sun would shine through a ventilator onto the opposite wall, so it was rather like a camera, and these little round balls of light used to play a sort of gentle quadrille for about half an hour, and then the sun would get down low enough and it would all go out, and it always intrigued me, and that's stuck in my memory for years. And whenever I go into that room now, I look for these little balls.
What year were you born?
September the 24th, 1917.
Right, and what was your employment immediately before you joined the RAAF?
I was a tool maker at General Motors Holden's in the tool room at Woodville, South Australia, yes, making car bodies, not engines.
Yes. And what date were you enlisted into the RAAF?
It would have been January or February 1938. Mm-hmm. And I left Holden's under somewhat of a cloud, but for very good reasons. And then I did some civil aero club flying, and was able to, I'd qualified for my A ticket. And it was after that that I joined the Air Force in early 1938. Having done a trade test to get accepted, and then of course the decision was made whether we should be an airframe fitter or a engine fitter. And fortunately it came down on the side of the airframes, and I worked pretty hard at that. It just sort of seemed to be the right thing to do, and I came out top of my course. with about, I think it was 98% pass. And there were two lecturers that we had, and one of them said that they knocked off a couple of marks to make it look right. But that's the only time I've ever excelled in any exam. But, so that was so that was early 1938, and then I worked I was posted to number 3 squadron, which was then stationed at Richmond in New South Wales, and they were flying Hawker Demons. It was a biplane, and with a Rolls-Royce Kestrel engine, a V12. Beautiful aircraft. In fact, I think aircraft design lost its way after that. That was perfection, and I got an opportunity to fly them subsequently. During that time, I was, or just after that period, I was stationed at Point Cook, having been transferred to Tech Squadron. And in Tech Squadron, you were allocated an entire flying machine, usually one that had crashed or whatever, and it was your responsibility then to redesign components and hand tool them up so that you could get that aircraft flying. And then it was your requirement of this game that you had to go up on the first flight. Well, that made sure that you did things well.
Yes.
But that was the situation that I was in, and briefly in Tech Squadron. In the interim, inter alia, I had applied for a cadetship at Point Cook, and as fortune would have it, I was accepted into the RAF College at Point Cook in 1940, and early 1940, and graduated about the middle of that year as a pilot officer.
Thank you. So that's the middle of 1940. Just backtracking to when you did your initial flying training as a civilian, would it be true to say, and I won't go into the detail of it, that you were a model student?
Probably, I'm not sure, but I certainly had enthusiasm.
The play was on the word model.
Oh, yes, well, yes.
So I won't go into that.
You can fill that in if you like.
Okay. When were you sent to Malaysia?
Yes, now there's a thing. My first posting after graduation was about mid-1940 to 12 Squadron in Darwin, and they were flying Wirraways. And I knew enough about aerodynamics and Wirraways and engines at that stage to realise that it was virtually a flying portmanteau or even a coffin. They were underpowered, and I didn't want to be in that particular club. So I asked if there was any opportunity, would it be possible for me to transfer into 13 Squadron, which had just arrived in the Flying Hudsons. And the 13 Squadron was on its own airstrip, which was still in process of being completed. And 12 Squadron was using the old civil aerodrome. So that transfer was effected, and I spent the next 2 or 3 months, I suppose, with 13. We had a rather unhappy crash at Broome, taking off in early morning, and for some reason the number one, I was second dicky. The pilot had great difficulty in getting power and tried to boost one engine against the other, which was just crazy, and we slewed around and just cleared the opposite fence, taking off, and then crashed in an adjoining paddock, and it caught fire. So there were 6 of us in it, a fitter and a rigger and a four-man crew. So that grounded us at Broome for about a week, I suppose. Another aircraft was sent down and we flew back to Darwin. And some weeks after that, I was notified that I was being posted to 1 squadron in Singapore, which was a surprise. And the reason for that was that the cadet, going back to cadet school, the laddie who was next above me on pass out at Point Cook had been writing sweet nothings to his lady love in Perth, and some idiot who was presumably a censor for the Air Force had censored his letters and had been so rigid in his report that this lad was sent home. And I don't know what happened to him after that, whether he was drummed out of the Air Force or what, I don't know, but it was a great shame. And I've never relished the idea that I took his place. But that was the situation. And so I joined 1 squadron.
So I'm sure there are lots of things that happened, but can we move forward now to the time around the 7th of December 1941?
Oh, yes. 7th, 8th December, because of the international date line.
Yes.
On the 5th of December, Malaya time, 3 aircraft were designated to do a parallel search, double visibility distance from each other, from the Malaya coast in parallel across the South China Sea to Indochina. And the aircraft that I was in was flown by John Ramshaw, first pilot. I was second pilot, and I can't remember the crew, but the monsoon was down heavy, torrential rain, and we had learnt from experience that you don't try to climb up over it because you get hit with electrics and everything else, lightning and so on. So having tried to get through at a reasonable altitude, we had to sort of nudge down closer and closer to the sea, and the navigation was a simple matter of keeping on track to the compass. The pilot was virtually flying blind, and he was being dictated to by the second pilot with an open storm window, looking obliquely down behind the wing, and if you could distinguish waves, you would tell him to level off. And we did that for about half to 3/4 of an hour. Eventually came out in lovely sunshine, bubbly cloud at about 300 or 400 foot base. And there in front of us was the Japanese invasion fleet, line and stern, with a phalanx, like a T virtually, of armoured ships in front, and about 23 transports of about 15,000 tonnes or something like that each. And that was quite a surprise. We completed as best we could a reconnaissance. The conditions were ideal, good light, you could see forever, and the cloud was quite useful to change direction and then come back at it. So having done that, and with the prospect of running out of fuel, we had to get back to base. The middle aircraft had given up the job and had returned to base, so there were 2, ours at the western end and the extreme east by, what was the fellow's name? Can't think of it. But anyway, 2 aircraft reported this fleet, and we got back to Kota Baru, and there was a lot of activity around the place, obviously. And as far as I know, the signals were sent back to Singapore and eventually bounced off back to London and across the Atlantic to Washington, and the rest of its history. But the Japanese invasion of where the Americans were was on the other side of the date line, international date line, so that when the Yanks talk about when the Japs attacked, it's December the 7th, and it's December the 8th in Malaya.
Yes.
But that can be construed a number of ways. But I understand that the gentleman in charge in Honolulu, it was a Sunday, and he was out playing golf, and the message on his desk was unopened. But that's history.
Yes, well, that's Pearl Harbor. But
That's Pearl Harbor.
now, if we can go back to the day when you and your number one attacked the.
Yes, well, that's right.
fleet.
That was December the 10th. Oh, wait a minute. December the 6th that I've just related. Then there was a day in between, on December the 8th, Malaya time, about 1 o'clock in the morning, we heard firing on the beach. And our airstrip was in parallel with the coast, just behind the coconut palms, really. So it was in point blank range. And we were in the second aircraft off that morning, bombed up with 1,000 pounds of bombs, and attacked the shipping. There were 3 transports offloading equipment and troops with lighters, twin hull lighters. So it was a pretty busy sort of atmosphere, and we just went in and skip bombed the best we could and pulled up and away. Then you had to circle around a bit to get back onto the landing field.
Yes.
So it was all a bit circuits and bumps. There was not much time to. In fact, I'd lit a cigarette at that stage, and was still smoking a cigarette when we landed that I'd lit before taking off. So that's how quick it was.
Yes.
But it was a rough sort of night. It was a quarter moon, a waning moon, and so the light was tricky, but occasionally the clouds would clear and you'd get a fairly good view of where you were at. And subsequent to that first sortie, other aircraft coming back had referred to a cruiser which was standing away from the transports, but further out to sea. And John Ramshaw, who was my number one, he and I discussed this with each other, and we thought, well, look, if that damn thing wants to poop off, they can wipe this airstrip off just like that. And so we decided to, with our next bomb load, to go and find it. And we did. Coming in, it was rather pretty, really, because of all the tracer and so on floating past you. But the technique in those days was what was known as masthead attack, which means getting down about 9 or 10 feet off the drink and going for your target, open your bomb doors. And of course, the Hudson had these bomb bays that opened up, and once they were down in the slipstream, you had this extra keel surface, which you could go up and down, but sideways no. And that made you a sitting duck, really, for anybody on board a ship. Anyway, that's what we did, and we dropped our bombs on this cruiser and pulled up and away, and had that sort of lovely feeling. It thought, well, perhaps we'd got away with it. And getting nearer the shore and just within sight of the 3 boats that were sending in troops and equipment, Ramshaw looked at me in a very startled way, and he said, "I can't control it, Don." And I think what had happened, with hindsight, I think the hydraulics had been wrecked. And of course, a lot of the controls on the Hudson relied on hydraulics. And so I think our bomb bays were still open. That's one thing. And we were flying at about, at that stage, I think we were flying at about 400 feet, and we completely lost control, and we ditched into the sea, doing about 200 knots.
Yes.
And then subsequent to that, I found myself floating around in the South China Sea in the Mae West.
Yes.
Ramshaw survived the impact. Would have been about, on my reckoning, about 15 or 20 minutes after I discovered that I was alive. And I called out to see if anybody else was there, and he responded, but only very briefly, and said he didn't think he was going to be able to make it. So I never saw John again.
No.
And the other two members of the crew were bound up in the aircraft that had no chance at all.
Yes.
So I was supported by a Mae West and floated around along the coast there for the rest of that day, with nothing much happening other than fish coming and eating raw parts of me. But towards evening, I was lucky to get into a Malay prau, which came out, and God missed out on that one too. There were no paddles. But I was able to get into this thing by coming directly over the one end. If you tried to get in from the side, you'd upset the whole apple cart. But how I got in, I can't remember. I just seemed to be racked with pain everywhere. And that evening, just before dusk, a Hudson, I think probably one of the 8 Squadron Hudsons, flew low over me, and I waved. And I thought, oh well, perhaps there'll be somebody to come and get me. That didn't happen, and the next day I floated and drifted up to, I suppose, about, on my estimate, about 15 or 20 miles offshore. And I was getting pretty thirsty at that stage. And to try and lessen the offshoots of thirst, I drank my own urine. Just dribble a little bit with a cupped hand and then swallow it and try again. It was stinking hot. It was a horribly hot day, and after that, when evening fell, I was getting a bit despondent. And it would have been about 9 or 10 o'clock that night. I was lying flat out on the bottom of this prow. I heard rhythmic sound coming through the side, and it was a flotilla of ships with escort coming down from Singapore or Songkhla in Thailand to presumably replenish supplies and so on, and keep the invasion going. And I was right in their path. The moon was still evident. Well, at least there was enough light to see, and one large ship went in front of me, and in the gap between was a little gunboat. They looked like a field piece bolted to the foredeck, and I think they'd had a number of these gunboats so they could go up creeks in when the Galantan River was in flood. They could go up these creeks and be a support to their troops. I think that was the idea. But anyway, I called out. You right?
I'm just stopping it for a second. I think I've got it on pause. No, I haven't.
Yes, well, there's a gunboat just moved past me, and I called out, "Help!" And nothing happened. But then one of the sailors on the deck heard this and called back, "Oi!" I learned Japanese very quickly, and I replied in the same fashion. They cut the engines of this thing and did a circle around and picked me up. It was a very small thing, and as I say, it had this field piece bolted to the foredeck, and we'd seen another one on our first effort going across to Indochina, And so I thought that that's obviously what it was. But so they hove to. I got lifted out of the. There was only about 3 feet of freeboard, and I got lifted up out of my little canoe onto the deck. And then when the sailors found out it wasn't one of theirs, they were going to heave me back, and I was saved by the young lieutenant who was in charge. And then after that, they had a look at my injuries and so on. I was like a piece of raw steak from the shoulders down to my bum, and they poured raw iodine over it. And I lost interest in proceedings after that. But then they had put a sheet of greaseproof paper over my back, and of course the exudate had stuck this thing tight, and I wore that for about a month afterwards in Saigon. But in the interim they had taken my clothes, laundered them. I was in Japanese garb, in bed, and when I started making moves that I was still around, there was a young able seaman at the doorstep who then disappeared and came back with a very nice meal, beautifully cooked. And that's how I became a prisoner of war.
Yes. And you then moved, they actually took you back to Saigon?
No, they took us to Singora.
Yes.
And it was there that I spent a rather uncomfortable night in the Navy headquarters, which were just commandeered houses. And unknown to me, there were 3 RAF lads from 60 Squadron had been down in a Mark IV Blenheim in Thailand, and they were wandering around in the jungle for a while, and the Thais dobbed them into the Japs, and they finished up in the civil jail, and I did too, after a rather unpleasant night in the Navy headquarters. But the naval bloke ashore was very pakasab, and obviously been trained in Great Britain in the Navy, and he emerged with the horrible news that, and he was grinning like the Cheshire Cat, that the Prince of Wales and Repulse had been sunk. So I told him to go hopping to hell, I don't believe you. And he said, well, there's a wireless set over there on the other side of the room. If you can get over there and twiddle the knobs, you'll know, get Singapore, you'll know that it's right. So I didn't even bother. A few minutes later, he came back with 2 glasses and a bottle of scotch, and poured out a generous libation for both of us. And we drank to distant friendship. Then he complained that he didn't have facilities that where he could keep me, and I was off, then handed over to the army, and he said rather significantly, well, your treatment will not improve.
Yes.
And he was dead right. But that's the
Yes.
Thailand thing, and then we were taken off to Saigon.
Yeah, so from Saigon, I presume the Kempeitai interrogated you, did they, or?
Yes, I had some sessions with the Kempeitai, I suppose, in Thailand, Lower Thailand, in the jail. I was in solitary there for quite a long time, and I was taken out a couple of times into a small room with people questioning me, and but that was fairly low key, I suppose. I lied like a trooper, and that was the end of that. They seemed Honour was satisfied that they'd questioned me on things and I'd given them some answers.
Yes.
But they were totally specious.
Was it the same routine in Saigon?
Much the same. Once we'd got to Saigon, there wasn't much they could ask us. It had all been taken out, but they were more concerned, I think, with what to do with us. And when Singapore fell, it was very easy to put us on a Jap troop ship and back to Singapore.
Right.
And that's how I got back.
So what happened when you were brought ashore in Singapore?
Put into a Marmon truck. Do you know the little Marmon trucks?
Yes.
There was 5 of us. The 3 RAF boys, myself, and John Close.
Oh, Lieutenant Colonel John Close.
That's right.
Mm.
Well, he was lieutenant then.
Mm.
Didn't know. And Jimmy King, Arthur James King, who was an Australian from New South Wales, had an alluvial tin mine that he was working at Singora as a civilian. But he was our man on the listening post. They didn't know that.
Yes.
And there's another story there. But so we got back to Singapore. Jimmy King was taken off as a civilian and went elsewhere. We didn't see him again, although he did survive the period. And the 4 of us were packed into this back of this Marmon truck and taken into Changi and just dropped off on the road. At that stage we were bound up like sacks of potatoes with hands behind the back, blindfold, and legs tied as well, and just heaved off the back of this truck and it drove out. Now, we had no idea where we were. We heard voices and it was English that we were hearing. And out of this sea of faces, somebody had taken the blindfold off, and I was nursing my elbow. This wonderful bloke dressed up in the completely, thought he would just come off parade at Sandhurst with a monocle. And he came forward and lifted me to my feet. He said, "Name's Morrison, Leicestershires. Would you care to join my mess?"
I think you also said he had a Sam Brown belt on and
oh yeah, Sam Brown.
A swagger stick.
Yeah, no, the swagger
and
stick.
a Gurkha regimental hat.
That's right, yes. Name's Morrison, Leicestershires.
So you then became associated with the British troops? And
I became a sub, and of course what he was doing was recruiting. Because up country, the British battalion was East Surrey's and Leicestershires. They amalgamated on the way down because they were decimated.
Yes.
They lost a lot of officers because the officers had a tendency to walk up and down on top of slip trenches rather than get into them.
Yes.
And Morrison was of course recruiting. Anyway, they were a good mob and I enjoyed their company.
Now, whilst you're a part of the British elements there, you were chosen to go up to Thailand as part of H-Force.
Yes, we had got back to Changi at that stage. The work we were doing on Singapore Island had finished.
Yes.
In essence, what we were doing was messing around the island golf course. It was absolute sacrilege. Putting roads around and Japanese ornamental bridges across the areas of the
waterways,
the 2 reservoirs, Magrichi and Pierce. I think it was Magrichi Reservoir. We were doing all this ornate bridges and so on, and behind on Pukatima Hill, the backdrop, they built a Shinto shrine. Well, we built it. They brought their artisans from Japan to do this as a memorial to their own troops. So we were involved in that initially, and then when that job finished, we went back into Changi briefly, and then we were recruited by trainloads up to Thailand.
So what?
On the premise that we were going to well-conducted
convalescent type.
Geneva Convention type situation for prisoners of war in Thailand.
Yes.
Ha.
About what date did you go up there?
I wouldn't be able to tell you. I've got no idea of the dates.
Do you remember the name?
Well, it was on H-Force, so it was FGH.
Yes. Well, I think it must have been around June 43.
But
D-Force went up, well, F-Force went up in April, so you're the next group. Do you remember the names of the British medical officers who were in H-Force?
yes, there was Austin Best was one. He had been in the Pacific area on Christmas Island, I think, as a medico. There was a Colonel Davidson.
Was he a doctor?
Yes, yes, and permanent in the Indian Army.
Yes.
John Diver.
John Dowie.
Was on F Force with us and in the same camps. I can't remember any others at the moment.
What about the Australian doctors? Any that come to mind?
No, because I only met them afterwards, I think subsequently after we came home. But see, I stayed with the British Battalion. Although we were working alongside Aussies, our mess and everything else was English operated.
Now, what work were you doing?
Initially labouring, hammer and tap we used to call it, drilling rock with a sledgehammer and two working together with a rod drill,
yes.
star drill, and you'd take it turnabout. The bloke sitting, squatting on the ground would have hold the tool steady, and you had to lift it and turn it in between hits with the mallet, and then you made a little turban of grass and had a vessel of water so that you could put water in there, and the turban of grass stopped the water from gushing out of the hole, and that lubricated things, and you were able to drill faster. But the darg for each day was 1 metre a day, and that sometimes it was difficult. If you got onto the site soon enough, you might be able to find a crack that you could work. And the Japs kept pretty rigidly to it that once you'd finished your metre, you could go back to camp. So that's how we worked for quite a long time.
Now, you must have been in the vicinity of what is now commonly known as Hellfire Pass.
Yes, from what I've seen, Hellfire Pass was a little bit back further up back towards Bangkok than we were. We were a little bit further in front of it. But I don't like the term Hellfire Pass.
No. Well, it was a name that, as I understand, was only given to the site post-war.
Yes, I think so. Yes, it wasn't known under that.
Do you know the name of the camps you were in? Oh, you did say Tongshan.
Tongshan
yes.
was the first camp. And
did you go further
so we were
north
working on the railroad and cuttings and things like that. And then we went up to Conquita.
Yes. After
the cholera had made big inroads into our group. And we went up to Conquita and we were working on bridges.
So you move up to Conquita, it must have been a little bit later, probably around September or October, just around the time the chaps were trying to finish the line. But you were involved in bridge building up there,
That's
weren't
right.
you? What was the name of the engineer that you had on that side?
Lieutenant Shimizu. It was interesting because I had made a set of wings for myself, and I'd lost the bloody things for about a year, and I found them 2 nights ago when I was looking for my bow tie to go to a Burns night thing at the club, and that was on Friday. And lo and behold, there's my bloody wings. I left them in my pocket.
Yes.
But these I wore,
Yeah.
and Shimizu nominated me to be in charge of the work gang that I was representing.
And how many were in the work gang?
I think it would have been a party of about 15 or 20 of us, not more. And the the interesting thing was, of course, that I had been chosen by him, I think, because I'd like to keep my appearance up. I think, you know, so little bullshit baffles brains. And so the wings were there, and he actually picked me out and said, I want this bloke to be in charge of this working party. So that's how it was. And it meant that I got a pretty lazy run, and my back used to give me rashes. You know, multiple fractures in my spine, didn't know about it, never had any x-rays until I got home. And to work like that and to stand and so on were difficult. Anyway, I found myself in charge of this working party and liaison between him and everybody else. But he lost a hell of a lot of face when the cutting that we were building this bridge in front of, eventually the workers got through that, and there was our little bridge finished, but exactly 1 metre higher than the floor of the cutting. And poor old Shimizu lost a lot of face. And he lost more face going back to an engineering unit to try and get differential pulleys and so on to take the strain. And the idea was that you would then cut the supports, the vertical supports, and then lower the bridge down. And he borrowed 2 very inadequate differential pulleys to do this job, and I told him that it just wouldn't work. I'd had plenty of experience in General Motors Holdens as a toolmaker on this particular corner, but I couldn't go into long explanations with him.
Yes.
So I said, look, none of my blokes are going to go under there and work in that. It's dangerous. Having borrowed 2 differential pulleys from a Japanese unit. And he wouldn't hear of this. And in any case, he'd lost so much face already that he was just about a cot case. He needed a psychiatrist. So I said, well, look, none of my men are going to go under there over my dead body. So he lined us all up and slapped our faces. Symbolic. And when he came to me, he was so worn out, it was like a feather, you know. However, there was a couple of our blokes decided that they would go under anyway for the sake of peace. And I said, well, look, you're doing it at your own risk. I can't, this thing's going to collapse. The supports we had were inadequate. The 2 differential pulleys were not up to the job. And I'd had a lot of experience with that, lifting heavy cast iron dies around the shop floor. So I was parked on one side, and Shimizu gave me away as a bad thing. And there were about 5 working underneath. There were 3 Japs and 2 POWs with saws cutting these things. And eventually the thing took a crazy lean. One of the differential pulleys broke, and the whole damn thing came down. And the logs and things everywhere. And eventually arms arrived out through small holes and things, and the 4 or 5 of them got out. The only person who was badly injured was a Jap who had very poor sight, and his glasses were broken, so that got rid of him. But then we all had to go back to camp and bring out more gear and rebuild the bridge. And that he was really under pressure for old Shimizu. But we got it done. But that was at the time, of course, when everything was all stops out, because we were not far below the point where the rail was to link up.
Yeah. Was Shimizu a dreadful chap? Or?
No, very nice. No, he was a gentleman, nice fellow, and I think was bored stiff too. And I suppose, like any combatant, he was felt that he'd been bypassed by events.
Yes. Can I just take you back to when you were down south in Thailand, and you mentioned that one of the doctors wanted you to become the donor for a one-to-one transfusion.
Yeah, oh yes, Austin Best.
Yes, could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Well, to attempt any of these sorts of manoeuvres was pretty heroic, I think, with hindsight. And Best was, well, he approached me to see whether I would agree to a one-to-one transfusion. And he'd set up a couple of couches, or chungs as we called them, one higher than the other, and the patient with the lower blood pressure was down low and I was up high, and he had some India rubber tubing, and very, very difficult sort of situation to find a vein, let alone put a cannula in it. And the rubber tubing, I think the inner lining of it was rough, and I think that was conducive to clotting. Initially we tried direct transfusion, then he introduced, we had a bit of a stay of proceedings and came up with some saline in a bottle and infused that into the tube.
Did he mix the saline?
That's right.
With the blood, the whole blood.
Mm-hmm. So my incision was here, and but that didn't work either. I think altogether we were messing around for about 2 or 3 hours, and then Dr. Best gave it best.
Yes.
And he was mainly concerned about me then. The patient's condition deteriorated and he died about 2 nights later.
Now, can I now take you forward to when Kevin Fagan did some surgical work on you, and you had a rather unusual recovery with the assistance of some red ants, I believe.
Millions, yeah. This is after the Burma Railway. We came back to Singapore, and some of us were working out on a swamp where rubber trees had been planted previously, and for some reason the Japanese were clearing the swamp of the resultant stumps when the thing had been cleared. So you were working mainly up to water about chest height or a little bit lower, with mud squeezing everywhere. And these stumps had been left as a result of the upper part of the trees had been sawn off. But there was usually enough projecting to get a leverage. And so we had to winkle these things out of the holes where they'd been blown. And there were a whole web of small roots and so on that you had to get around or break or whatever. And we're working in teams of 4. And the technique was to rock the stump like a rotten tooth and try and enlarge the cradle, get it out to a point where you could reveal the smaller holding roots, chop those, and then roll the damn thing out of the swamp. There was a truck which was standing by, which would hold about 3 stumps on a tray. They were had been delivery trucks, I suppose, at some stage. The hydraulics worked all right, so the brakes would work, but no engine. And your working team, having manhandled these things up onto the tray, would then get to the front of the truck with no engine at all, just a driver with his foot on the brake and able to steer. And with a rope, and you'd manhandle the truck back to Changi Jail. And the courtyard there was a repository for these stumps, which were allowed to dry out, and then were hacked up, and that was our fuel for cooking the rice to have our meals. Very simple. But
so you got an infection?
I got back to camp, and this was at Syme Road, and I had this tight feeling in my back, and somebody said, "Hey, you've got a bit of a lump there, mate," and I reported sick. And who should turn up but Kevin Fagan. he took one look at me and he said, "Oh my goodness, boy, you've got a hematoma there." I didn't know what a hematoma was, but it was a large sausage, I can tell you. And he said, "I'm sorry, I haven't got the anaesthetic, but we've got to release this thing, otherwise it's going to create mayhem." I think there was a bit of a spurter there as well. So, having apologised, not any local, he went to work and inserted another red rubber tube, having cut sections out of it in the middle, and drained this hematoma. And I was sent into a hospital bed, and I can remember Best and various other doctors having a conference at my foot the bed, and it was a charpoy, cross springs. And I wondered why they were having this sort of debate, and then I don't remember anymore. And of course I never saw Kevin Fagan again, for obvious reasons, that he'd got cerebral malaria. But I didn't know that. But anyway, I came to in the hospital, would have been some days later, with a pain in the tip of my thumb. And my hand had come to rest above my head and was just about touching the wall of the hut. And to my amazement, when I looked around, there was a rat there having a nice drink from the top of my thumb. So I withdrew the thing, and the rat went away. My next move was to touch the body next to me, and there was only about knee width between the beds. And this Englishman looked at me in great horror, and he said, "Good God, man, I thought you were dead." So, well, that's nice. So I said, "Well, is there a medical orderly?" And he said, "Yes, there is a medical orderly. It happens to be Lobo, an Anglo-Indian, who had a most resplendent tattoo on his chest with furled flags and all sorts of things." And so I said, "Well, any chance, where is he?" And he said, "He'll be up in the top hut." So I had to get out under my bed on my hands and knees and crawl all the way up this hill. And all that Lobo saw was this awful looking figure, the head, just above the steps, and nearly fell off his seat. But anyway, he went to work and got some saline going through the tube, and discovered that I'd been taken over by a nest of red meat-eating ants, and they had cleaned up the whole job, and from that time on I got better.
Isn't that a good story? I like that. Now,
it's a nice little story, that one.
I think you did mention to me, and we may be having to close at around this point, that when you were a prisoner of war in Singapore, after you'd come back from the line, you were possibly attracted to studying to be a doctor, and you raised the matter with the great Bruce Hunt.
That's right, yeah. I borrowed Gray's Anatomy from Dr. Davidson, who was in the Indian Medical Service, and he'd carted this enormous Gray's Anatomy with him all around. That's what happens in prisoners of war, something that you thought might be useful for somebody else or whatever. And he was a bit sherry to start with, but then eventually relented, and he said, "Well, look after it." So I swatted up Gray's Anatomy as best I could. We had other people from various other walks of life, academics and so on, who could talk in terms of chemistry and physics and so on. And the latter days in Changi were conducive to this sort of thing. And I learnt a lot from that. I got some instruction from a Catholic padre in some Latin, brushed up on that. And so I was sort of in preparation for medical training. And then when the war stopped, and got home, I went to see my old headmaster at Adelaide High, and he made encouraging noises. And then, of course, the Empire Air Training Scheme, the post-war reconstruction training scheme came in,
Yes.
and I was eligible for that.
Excellent. I think we've missed the point that Bruce Hunt's advice to you.
Oh, yes. Well, yes, I spoke to Bruce Hunt and I'd asked him if he could give me some detail of his particular F-Force group, which he did. And I had notions of perhaps holding some lectures or whatever when I got home. And I mentioned to him en passant that I would hope to go on and study medicine. And there was a stunned silence, and he looked at me for a long time and he said, "You're mad. You'll never make it. It'll kill you."
And what did you interpret that to mean? It didn't kill you.
No, it hadn't.
No.
It's rejuvenated me.
You've had a very successful career in medicine.
Yes, with hindsight. Yes, I finished up as DMS, Medical Services.
Yes.
I'm a Foundation Fellow of the College of Medical Administrators. I've got a diploma in Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. I'm a Fulbright Fellow.
Yes.
It all sort of slotted into place.
Not to mention spending time in Antarctica.
Something like that, yes.
Don, I think we'll have to wrap because I think this is about to run out on
Oh,
us.
bless you, old son. Look,
But I do appreciate you giving me your time, and I can only reiterate, thank you so much.